Hi, my name's Tom Philo. I'm the archivist cataloger up here in the Girth Archives at Cal State Dominguez Hills. Originally, we planned on having you up here, and I'm very sorry that you're not able to come up here. We love showing this place off to people. There's a lot of fun stuff, but more importantly, we could have this discussion without me talking by myself for a long time. I would much rather that we interact on this, but things are what they are, and so we will we'll get through this the best we can. I'll apologize in advance for a number of things. First, that in talking about archival silences and gaps, this is what we wanted to do. It's distasteful. There's many of them are based on race or gender, and it's upsetting to see certain words or think of certain things, and I hope that you understand why I'm showing you some of these things. But also, I'll apologize for my technical glitches on this. I haven't done a Zoom recording before, so I will probably, there might be some long periods where I'm staring at the screen wondering what's going on, and so bear with me on that. So when we talk about archives, we're going to talk about two kinds. One is the so-called formal archive, and the other is going to be the informal archive. The formal archive is usually more of a big, big organization or something with power, and the informal one is something different, but we'll talk about that. So what is an archive? And let me play my I'm going to put up two definitions, and I really hate it when people read the whole screen to you. So I'm just going to put these two up here. One is by a definition of archives by the Society of American Archivists, the other by the International Council on Archives. And you can read these, and the key thing in each of these, it's implied and not emphasized as much as I would like, is this notion of materials created in the conduct of everyday affairs, created by individuals and organizations as they go about their business. And this is critical, this kind of dispassionate nature of archival records. But you'll see why. Next, who keeps archives? Essentially everyone. You'll notice going top to bottom that these are pretty heavy hitters in the world. Governments, courts, big businesses, corporations, unions, religious organizations. When they call archives repositories of power, this is what they're talking about. These are the people who create our archives, who store records, who create records, who determine who goes into the archives, that is, whose records are kept, and who is not allowed in. For purposes of this, when we talk about formal archives, we're going to talk about businesses and corporations, although governments and the like are every bit as important. But any archive in this realm creates records for three reasons, at least two, but usually three. And first, there are legal reasons. You keep an archive because, or you keep legal records because you have to prove that you're following the law. Let's take an organization like Dominguez Hills. There are thousands of laws that they have to follow. Laws about hiring, laws about firing, laws about building codes. There, what things they can use to eradicate weeds, or the raccoons or anything like that. There are laws about it, how they hire people, fire people, and all those. And at any time, if they're challenged on it, they have to be able to prove that they're doing right. So they constantly have to check to see what the laws are and then show that they are in compliance with them. As you can imagine, there's also financial records. Just as many, if not more, records. Even a nonprofit such as Dominguez Hills takes in a great deal of money from the state, from the CSU itself, from scholarships, from from grant funding places, from students, and they have to prove that they are worthy stewards of that money. So they generate thousands and thousands of records, weekly reports, monthly reports, semi-annual reports, annual reports, of these financial transactions. And again, they can be checked at any time, so they have to make sure they're in compliance. The third type of body that has some control over them is what I call a regulatory body. For Dominguez Hills, we're accredited in some of our programs, and there are bodies that accredit us. It's like the business school, or the library has to have certain things in it to be in compliance with the accrediting bodies for other schools. We have this thing called WASC, the Western Association of Schools and Colleges, that gives us this sort of academic physical every few years and tells us if we're healthy and that we can continue on, or if we need a checkup again in 2 years or 3 years or 5 years. Fortunately, right now we're deemed healthy, and we have a 10-year thing. But these are viewed as independent on this slide, but in reality they overlap. If you break the law, a legal law, you can be fined, and that takes you into the financial realm. If you are found embezzling money or something like that, then there are legal ramifications. And the regulatory body can impose both on you. Take a look at the Houston Astros baseball team, for instance. They got caught cheating. They were stealing signs during the World Series and during the season. And so the regulatory body, that is Major League Baseball, imposed fines on them, $5 million, I think it was. They had legal issues. They lost draft choices, and ultimately the manager and I think the general manager were fired. So these are the main bodies that produce, for which we produce records. And the value of archives then, and archival theorists call these transactions all the time. Any record is a transaction because it buys you something or it takes something from you. It allows you, say, if you want to buy some kind of food, you go into the store, and your transaction is you give them money and you take away the food. Archival records are like that too. You give them records that show that you're doing something or that you're not doing something, and you're allowed to continue on. We value these over time because society changes. The things that were okay in 1920 may not be good in 2020. And they are viewed as repositories of power. Like I said, these are heavy hitters. And so these are the people that society deems worthy. And records are kept on who is worthy, or who is considered a winner, let's say. And if they keep records for people who are not, then it is because they have violated some custom or law or rule of society. So every archival record has the potential to show you what things were like the year it was created. And that is, another, of course, another part of archives is that they are created contemporaneously at the time that something happened. So they show you, what their taxes were for 1940 or 1920 or something like that. And we trust that they were created. And when you pull out one of these records and look at it, it can seem weird to you. The language is different. The laws are different. The things it allows are different. And you can look and say, people really did that, or that was a thing in 1925. And yes, it was. And so the value of archives is that it gives you that snapshot of society, shows you what it was like, what was allowed, what was not allowed. And so we value them for that. Moving on, and well, let me just cover one more thing. The part I really want to emphasize is that archival records are kept generally by a dispassionate process. There's going to be racial overtones to some of what I say. There's going to be really bad stuff in some cases. And it's not necessarily that the people creating the records were racist, but this is what society allowed or demanded at a certain time. So, we'll try to go with that. And let me get out of that for the moment. And a lot of the records that I'm going to show you come from the Rancho San Pedro collection. And that is kind of our core collection. The Rancho San Pedro was essentially the South Bay, and one family owned most of the South Bay. So the Rancho San Pedro collection sort of gives us the business history, the economic history of the South Bay from roughly 1900 to about 1950, 55. And it's very valuable for that. One of the things the Dominguez family did, they had a number of these small holding companies that leased land to small tenant farmers. And the Dominguez family hated selling land. It was late in the 50s before they really started doing that. And so they leased to people and then later discovered oil on the Rancho San Pedro. So that changed a lot of things. But among the group that they leased to, since we were so close to Gardena, was the Japanese American community, a lot of small farmers from there. At the time that these take place, there was a great animosity toward Japanese Americans and Japanese here. They, in the late 1800s and early 1900s, the Western states thought they were being invaded by Asian migrants. And they feared them because they were such good farmers, and thought that they were really going to overrun the state and push the white people out. So they developed these alien land laws, which put very strict guidelines on who could lease land and how long they could lease land, whether they could own land or not. And they got stricter and stricter. So finally, nobody of Japanese American descent essentially owned land after a certain period. But they leased land, and there were severe restrictions on a lot of these things. But before we show that, let me show you a lease from someone not affected by the alien land laws. And here is a lease from 1925. The Del Amo Estate Company was One of the Dominguez family companies, one of the Dominguez daughters married Gregorio Del Amo, so it became the Del Amo State Company. So this is Ladislao Torres. It shows that he's leasing 21 acres, more or less, where it is. See, the lease is, it lays out the facts from the 1st of January, 1925 to 1926, $525. Otherwise, nothing on the lease until you get to his signature, including these dotted lines. And I'd like you to pay really close attention to those. There is nothing there. It is completely empty. So Ladislao Torres comes in, signs his name on this, hands over his $500, and he's free to go. So let's stop that for a minute. And that is someone who is not affected by the alien land laws. Now we come to the next person. And let me share this. This is someone named Kyoto Kakuta. And he, first thing you notice, the first page of the Torres lease looked like this. But the first page of this is this birth certificate looking thing. It's actually a certificate of Hawaiian birth, which Hawaii, being a possession of the United States, made him a citizen. So this had to be included with the lease to prove that they were in compliance with the alien land laws. So if somebody came by and says, who's this Kyoto Kakuta guy? They could say, well, he's an American citizen. And, you know, there was nothing about Mr. Torres in this. Okay, so you go through, same thing. This is 10 acres, so it's about half the size of the Torres lease. You go through the same things, and then you get to this little piece of paper that's pasted in on those dotted lines I asked you to consider. It's understood that lessee, that is Mr. Kakuta, is a citizen of the United States, a copy whose naturalization certificate is attached. He agrees to strictly conform to all the provisions of the Alien Land Act. And if he permits any Japanese or other alien not eligible to citizenship to occupy the land instead of him or with him, then he'll be dismissed and the lease be terminated. Okay, so there they are in full compliance with the alien land laws. But there is no presumption on Torres. Mr. Torres could have Asian American friends. He could have Chinese or Japanese friends. He could sublet to them just as easily as Mr. Kakuta could. But there is no suspicion of him because he is not Japanese American. And this is the whole idea of privilege. You know, we talk about white privilege or any other kind of privilege. And a lot of white guys get really hacked about this. They say life was not easy for them. You know, their father lost a job or they worked 2 jobs going through college or something like that. And they're right. You know, life is tough for everyone. But what it means is, in the case of this lease, the law is not going to bother with you. You can move through the sphere. There's this narrative thread that goes through the community and through the society. And it allows certain things that it doesn't allow them. It comes down to power. Archives are considered repositories of power. And, you know, power is a word used a lot nowadays in terms of like the Marvel movies and that type of thing. But power in this case means, do you have the ability to insert yourself into this narrative, this thread that goes through society, through the culture? If you are in it, do you have the power, the ability to change how you are represented there? In the case of Mr. Kakuta, the answer is no. He is under these laws, he is deemed to have no power. Therese does. He can come and go. There's no presumption on him. He is, if you want to call it that, he is the elite. He is the powerful. And the powerful, the ultimate powerful, pays no attention to him. It lets him come and go. And again, we're not saying that the Del Amos were racist. It's that they were forced to respond to society at that time. Okay, so, but as we go through, there are other things that pop up of interest, you know, here. As long as the Japanese Americans were behaving and acting according to the laws, and believe me, they checked up on them a lot, they didn't pay any attention to any of their activities. And one of them that, you know, when we talk about archival silences, this is it, you know, and then some. Here is a letter to the Dominguez Estate Company signed by people with, a lot of people with Japanese surnames. And it's saying that they are going to give up a building that they built on a piece of land that they occupied, that is, that they leased. And it was right at, as you see, Central Avenue and a little south of Victoria. So not too far from our campus. And they placed a one-story frame building that they've been using as a private school for Japanese children. So they lived on this land long enough to have a culture. They lived here long enough to have a neighborhood, to have neighbors, to have friends, to raise their children, and to instruct their children. There's no record of it. I have looked through almost every piece of paper in this archive to try to find something about this school. And there is nothing. It's lost. They are invisible to us. We know nothing about it. I was hoping, there's this thing called the poetics of exclusion, and I call it the archival irony, and the Kakuta lease is a case of that, where they're so anxious to exclude someone that they end up documenting them more completely. So, you know, it's, as you look at it now, we know nothing about Therese. He's dead to us. But we know a lot more about Kakuta and some of the others. So these are two types of silences. There's another one, you know, your article called these simple and perfect exclusions. And, you know, of course, if an Alien Land Act is going to be, by its nature, perfect and total. Another one that, you know, is, I wanted to show you, the animosity towards the Japanese Americans continued on and reached a peak after December 7th, 1941, when Pearl Harbor was bombed by the Japanese government. And it, right after that, the government decided that the Japanese Americans were a problem. There were so many of them on the West Coast. So they came up with this executive order that doesn't mention the Japanese Americans by name, but it says you can declare something a war zone and critical to the war effort, and that people may be removed from there for their own protection. And so if they are removed, that you can give them housing and feed them and gainfully employ them and you know, et cetera. And it sounds very generous and kind. But of course, the whole point was to remove Japanese Americans from their homes. This poster Uh, you know, instructions to all persons of Japanese ancestry. It shows the area in which they live. You know, they are to report someplace where they will be taken away, usually to a very unpleasant place. But there's one little phrase here that's critical, and there's no Japanese person living in the above area will be permitted to change residence. I'm sorry, I need to head here. Pursuant to the provisions of Civilian Exclusion Order number 333, all persons of Japanese ancestry, both alien and non-alien, will be evacuated from the above area by 12 o'clock noon. All right, think of that phrase for a second. Alien and non-alien. What is non-alien? What's a non-alien resident? I'll give you a hint. I'm a non-alien resident. Probably you are too. Your instructor is a non-alien resident. Another word for it is citizen. So why don't they use the word citizen? Well, think of what they're doing. They're ripping people out of their homes and sending them to the middle of the desert, in some cases, to live in plywood shacks. So if you said both alien and citizen, then that word citizen resonates with people. It's like, hey, I'm a citizen. But if you can put it in language like non-alien, then they have to do some kind of mental math to say, wait, non-alien, that means really a citizen. And they won't do that. They just want to get the Japanese Americans out of there. And then that they're going to be evacuated. So evacuation is, you know, it's like they're being saved. You know, you evacuate people from a sinking ship, or if there's a flood, you evacuate the people, you know, and or forest fires or something like that. But it's this softening of language that lets you know that the powerful know they're doing something underhanded, and nobody is better at it than the government. So one last form of formal exclusion I wanted to show you. The Dominguez family got involved in housing developments in the late 30s and early 40s, including one called Beverly Wood Complex up near Beverly Hills. And when you create a housing development where the homes look pretty much the same, you come up with these things called covenants and restrictions. It's things that when you agree to buy the house or the condo or whatever, you agree to abide by certain rules so that it'll keep a certain look. You know, and to a certain extent, they make sense. You know, if you don't want, if the look you're going for is New England fishing village or something, you don't want somebody, you know, painting his house purple and making it look like a Frank Lloyd Wright house or something like that. But the, oops, go here. So they have this covenant and restriction for the Beverly Wood complex. And this is the Francis Land Company, another one of the Dominguez companies. This is the draft that they sent to the government. And so most of them, there's 15 covenants, 14 really, and the 15th is the one saying these will be this way forever. Most of them are pretty bland. You know, look at a couple of them. No fence or boundary wall be higher than 6 feet. And, you know, no temporary buildings or shacks or anything like that. You can't build a building elsewhere and then bring it onto the property. But then you get down to, you know, the 13th one of these, and it says, I'll read it because I know it's hard to read, that said realty shall not, nor shall any interest therein at any time be rented or leased or be occupied by any persons whose blood is not entirely that of the Caucasian race. The persons not of the Caucasian race may be kept thereon by such a Caucasian occupant, strictly in the capacity of servants of such Caucasian occupant. In other words, whites only. Then the next one that said realty shall not, or shall any interest therein at any time be sold, devised, or conveyed to, or inherited by, or be otherwise acquired by, or become the property of any persons whose blood is not entirely that of the Caucasian race. That means if, let's say, you adopt someone who is of a different race, you can't leave the house to that person. If you're widowed and you marry someone of another race, that person can't live there because of these covenants restrictions. That is as exclusive as you can get. And so this is, I would maintain that this tells you as much about race in 1940, which is when this was set, as some of the more extreme examples you find, because it is so bland and blasé. And it was just a lawyer writing a letter to the government, which is what a lot of history is. But they know they're doing something because they put it at the bottom. These are the last two covenants, 13 and 14, last one that, you know, all the other conditions will be, you know, in effect forever. And so they know they're doing something, but this is what society allows in 1940. So we have a good picture of it. These are the formal archives I wanted to talk about. I know I'm going on a bit here, so let me talk about something else real quickly here. And we have a collection, an informal collection called the Compton History Collection, City of Compton. It was materials collected by a guy named Robert Gillingham. He moved to Compton from Michigan when he was 10 years old, and he fell in love with the city. He lived there the rest of his life. He lived there. He wrote histories of it. He studied it. He wrote the history of the Rancho San Pedro. He was a teacher, and ultimately, towards the end of his life, he was the vice president of the Compton College. Now, as you look at this, he really revels in the creation of Compton of yesterday, of the Compton of when the settlers came here, and it was largely people from the Midwest. And as you look at this, it seems this would be very clear in a place like, you know, in a place in the Midwest, like Iowa or something, where a lot of the people who settled Compton came from. And there's a lot of things that aren't in here. And among those is you have to go down to towards the end, where there's a, what is it? Box 5 of 7, and the last two boxes are high school yearbooks, talking about Douglas Dollarhide, Compton's first Black councilman. That's the first mention of anybody Black in Compton. Also, Ross Miller, Dr. Ross Miller, African-American community leader. There's his obituary from 1996, but that was added after Gillingham died. Some people who held on to the collection added some stuff. Gillingham, other than Dollarhide, does not mention anybody who is not white. And remember, he was the vice president of Compton College. So let me stop this and bring another document back. And click through this quickly. Here's one person who is not mentioned. Cornelius Johnson, 1936 Olympic gold medalist in the high jump. He set an Olympic record. He was in what are called the Hitler Olympics, maybe the most significant Olympics of the 20th century, in which a number of black athletes kind of, showed up. Hitler, who was, of course, believed the Aryan race to be superior, and it really hacked him off. And so he was the first here. And this, it looks like they're doing the Hitler salute. They're not. It's something called the Bellamy salute, which is, when the Pledge of Allegiance was written. Originally, the choreography for it, if you will, is you would start saying, "I pledge allegiance to the United States, the republic for which it stands." And then when you talk about the flag, you would show out your hand that way. But it looked too much like the Nazi salute, and so in about 1940 they stopped. Okay, so nothing about him. Although note, he attended and trained at Compton College. Also not shown is Hayes Edward Big Ed Sanders from the 1952 Olympics, gold medalist in boxing, first African-American heavyweight. This was 8 years before Muhammad Ali. First American to win gold in 48 years. And look where he attended and trained, Compton College. Gillingham had to have known about them, but we can only guess why he doesn't include them. But it is a gap. It's an absence of something vital to that city, of something vitally interesting, of people who are of interest. And this silence carried on. The last person to do a history of Compton used Gillingham's papers. And even though he wanted to focus on the Black population more, there's no mention of Johnson or Sanders. And these are major Olympians of great accomplishment. There's nothing about them. This is pretty much, I think I'll stop here. I could go on, but I'm sure you need a lot of caffeine already. This, I hope, gives you some idea of archives as places of power, as archives of places of absence, and that if you ask questions when you're looking through the things, you will find that there are these great gaps. You may find more than I do. We love when people come into the archives because we're victims of our own viewpoint. And we may view the archives a certain way, but someone with a different background or different beliefs or different upbringing, different viewpoint, will see things that we won't. And we love it when that happens. So please come up to the archives sometime. I'd love to show you some of these. Come up on your own when we're able to come back to campus. And above all, thank you if you're still watching. And stay safe, and we'll hope to see you down the road. Bye now.